social anxiety can be very isolating, because when you believe that people are going to judge you or are going to think that you're stupid or that you're, going to be awkward if you interact with them, like, you can make your, world very small, because it become afraid to go to social events and interact with the world.
Everyone, welcome back to the Take 2 Minutes podcast. I'm your host and founder of Take2Minutes.org, Mark Vassell. Joining me this week is Noelle McWard. Noelle is a psychotherapist, group practice owner, and continuing education sponsor for mental health professionals in the state of Illinois. Noelle also leads workshops for therapists using a model for understanding and treating anxiety that was developed from her work with clients. Noelle is also the author of an upcoming book. We'll let her talk about that a little bit more. Noelle, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So we touched on your book briefly, and I think it's upcoming. Let's start with that, because I'm interested to know more about the book, and I think it applies some of the your workshop, or is talked about in the book. So why don't you talk about your book just a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. The working title of the book is Anxiety Unpacked, though that may change by the time it's published. And right now I'm expecting the publication will be either late 2024 or early 2025. And it is a book that is written for people with anxiety, but it is based on a model that, as you mentioned, that I developed that came out of my work with clients. And I first developed and was using it with clients. And, from their response to it, when I would share it with them, clients would say things to me like, why has nobody ever told me this before? Or I never thought about it that way, but that makes so much sense. And then would later reflect how much the work we were doing was really helping them with their anxiety in a different way. And that feedback actually made me think that maybe there was something different that they were hearing, certainly different than training I had gotten around anxiety. So I started creating workshops and trainings for therapists in Chicago, where I practice. And the feedback from therapists was that it also was new and helpful for them and how they would approach working with clients with anxiety. And several suggested, you should write a book about this. This could be helpful for, more people to have access to this information. And then a year and a half ago or so, I had the opportunity to do that. So I just spent the past year and a half writing it, and it's at the publisher and soon to be out in the world.
So I want to talk more about the model, but before we get into that, the book a little bit more. Took a year and a half to write it. Did you find there were writer's block times or difficulties getting through it? Did you find yourself isolating in certain times to get content out? Tell me more about the book writing experience.
Yeah, that process, it was, in some ways I felt like I had the advantage that it was based on a full day training I've already been given. So that really was the outline for the book. There was a lot of change that went into, what actually was written. But I felt like from that standpoint, I had a solid outline I knew what I was going to be talking about when I sat down, to write it. One of the biggest challenges was the time, actually making the time to write it. And what I found was most helpful is a couple of things. I did join a group coaching program that was for people writing books. So having that support was really invaluable, and is a parallel, I think, for people who are taking on hard or daunting or new, to feel like you don't have to figure it out all yourself and can be in an environment where you have support and you have other people who are going through it too and sharing, challenges, sharing, successes, and really cheering each other on. Along with that idea of support, what really also helped was I had a couple of friends who were also writing books at the same time, and we set aside writing weekends or full writing days. And I really credit that with actually getting the book written. If it were up to me to carve out the time and really, get through the writing process, it would have been much more difficult and probably would have taken a lot longer to do.
I can see that. I know that I find the acquaintances I have who have written books, I find it a fascinating process because I know it'd be difficult for me to find time to write a book. And so kudos to you for doing so and getting it done.
Thank you.
So a lot of your work is around anxiety, it seems like, and I'm certain not all of your clients are all just only for anxiety, but what got you into the focus? It seems like your focus is largely anxiety. Is that correct?
It is one of the areas of focus. Another area is couples therapy, but anxiety is like a real area of focus and expertise. And really where that came from early, when I started my career, and I've been practicing for 31 years now, when I started out, I was working in a setting where it was a community mental health setting, and I really saw whatever walked through the door. So it was a wide variety of, treatment issues, population. I was working with everyone from 5 years old to 94 years old and everything in between. And I really quickly found myself gravitating towards the clients who were presenting with anxiety. And at the time, I didn't really know why. I don't myself suffer from an anxiety disorder. I certainly know what it is like to be anxious. We all do. I mean, it's a human emotion and human experience. I think it was the urgency that, and the activation that clients with anxiety would present with that for me, I felt really compelled by. I felt very compelling. I often say I do better with the energy of anxiety than with the energy of depression. And, so that more activated energy was really compelling to me, made me really want to get in there and try to help people with that. And also early on made me realize I was ill-equipped to do that. Like I just didn't have enough tools and enough knowledge to adequately help my clients. And that set me out on a journey of getting a lot of training on my own in the treatment of anxiety disorders. And over the course of the first few years of my career, a lot of the training I did was really focused on the treatment of anxiety disorders and just acquiring as much information as I could to help.
So within Take 2 Minutes and within the podcast, anxiety is talked about oftentimes, and it's something that a lot of people do deal with. I think of anxiety as worrying about the future, forward thinking, forward concerns, possibilities, what ifs, that kind of stuff. How would you define anxiety?
I would just define it, that would be one type of anxiety that I would define. And really the model that I use and that guides my work is an idea that there are really actually three different types of anxiety or three root causes of anxiety. Each one is different and has its own unique characteristics that make it different from the other, that makes it really stand out and distinct from the others. Each has its own underlying need, which is seeking to be expressed through the anxiety, and really knowing that and understanding that is really important in getting to the root and really transforming that experience of anxiety. Each also has what I call its own objection or way the anxiety fights to preserve itself when challenged, because it always will fight to stay in control when challenged. And each has its own solutions that are really much more geared towards what that underlying need is. So one of the three is catastrophizing, which is exactly what you just described. It's, imagining future-oriented worries, making up stories about the future, about some terrible outcome, worst case scenario, catastrophic event that's going to happen, and then relating to that story as if it's what is happening or what is likely or is going to happen. So it is that future-oriented worry. And I think it's what most people do think about when they think of anxiety. And that is one form, and it's a very common form.
Okay.
I could talk about the other two if you'd like.
That's what I was going to ask next.
Okay.
I'm actually taking notes. So we have catastrophizing, which is future concerns, the what ifs, that kind of stuff. What's the second one?
Yeah. Second one is control. And this one there's a few different things I say about control. The first one is, I think most of us are familiar with the idea that there are always things that are in our control and things that are not in our control. Things that are in our control are what we think, how we react to a situation, choices that we make. Things that are not in our control are what somebody else thinks, what somebody else feels, why somebody else is doing what they're doing. And then there are all kinds of other things that are outside of our control, like weather and, some diseases and governmental decisions and things that people can get very focused on. And if we are overly focused on things that are not in our control and expend a disproportionate amount of energy around trying to change the things that are not in our control or control them, that it's in itself can lead to anxiety. That puts us in a position of feeling disempowered, victimized, helpless, powerless, because we're trying to accomplish something that is just purely, simply outside of our control. So on a very basic level, anxiety can come from where we are placing our attention and our energy. But there's a much deeper level to this idea of control and how it manifests as anxiety, which starts with an underlying belief or feeling state of I'm not okay or it's not going to be okay. And when that just, for a lot of people, they may not even recognize that that is their default belief or their default feeling state. It can be a viscerally felt, state of I'm not okay, I'm not going to be okay, or it's not going to be okay. And when that's there, we develop ways of coping that try to create the sense of it's okay, I'm going to be okay. And we do that in one of two ways. The first is to try to control our environment as much as we possibly can. And with the thought behind that, an unconscious thought behind that is if I know what to expect, or if things happen the way that I think that they should or I want them to, then I'll be okay. So we get very focused on our external environment looking a particular way. And this is people who have very rigid beliefs about how things should be done. They may have really strong attachment to there's a right way for things to be done and everything else is the wrong way. This is where we see perfectionism. It also can show up in like over researching or over preparing because there's this sense that I have to make the right decision or find the right answer, or else it's not going to be okay, although that part is often not conscious. So we see a lot of, those behaviors that really are all an attempt by that person to create a sense of a comfort that that they're going to be okay. The other way that this manifests is in trying to anticipate everything that could go wrong and creating a plan for what you're going to do in the event that that thing happens. So this looks like catastrophizing, but then takes it a step further and actually spends time creating plans for how you're going to handle the bad outcome when it happens. And for people who do this, they all describe that it's exhausting because you're expending a lot of energy trying to, think of everything that could go wrong and come up with plans for what you're going to do if that thing happens. These strategies, they sound reasonable at a certain level, but the reality is that neither of them works. And what they really create is a lot of anxiety. And so that becomes the root or a second form of anxiety.
I like that one. I shouldn't say I like that one. I relate to that one. And I think your explanation is spot on. I could, going back to COVID times, I think after COVID, a lot of people had anxiety. I know I had some anxiety that I never had previous to COVID. And a lot of it was around control. And once you said it, I completely related to some of my feelings back then and inability to control a situation. There's also a lot of messages in Take 2 Minutes around that. And I think as I've moved past that, I've realized if something's not in my control, I try not to waste any energy worrying about it. If you can't control it, you need to move on to something else you can control. Focus on the things you can't control. But I really enjoyed your explanation of the control one. So the third one is?
The third one is distorted beliefs. And so that is where you believe something to be true. And in the case of anxiety, those distorted beliefs will always be negative. So you believe something to be true. It could be about the world, but most often it's about yourself. You believe something negative to be true that is actually not true. And, when you have these negative beliefs about yourself, it affects the way that you feel, but it also affects the way that you interact in the world and you engage in the world. So there's a lot of behaviors that people develop unconsciously as a way of either compensating for that negative false belief or coping with that negative belief. So examples of this could be, and these are usually core fundamental beliefs about oneself. So it could be I'm unlovable, I'm a failure, I am an outsider, I'm awkward. So we see like social anxiety would stem from distorted beliefs. And when you have these negative beliefs about yourself, there, like I said, there are behaviors that you develop to try to compensate for them. So if for example, if you think that you are, fundamentally unlovable, when you engage in relationships, you're very likely to be very accommodating to others and to sort of always say yes to requests made of you, or always be like a people pleaser who's going to go along with whatever anybody else wants to do. You're also likely to not make your own needs known or ask for things for yourself. And, that all comes from, again, this unconscious sort of calculation that you make that if I'm fundamentally unlovable, the way that people will want to be in relationship with me, or that, people will want to spend time with me, is if I'm very accommodating to them. And as long as I don't ask for anything for myself or have any needs of my own. So there's a lot of different behaviors that can stem from these false beliefs that we hold about ourselves.
So in your model, you've taken anxiety and split it into 3 subcategories almost, and trying to identify which one of those the patient or person who's struggling with anxiety is, which one they're falling into, correct?
Right. And so I usually, with any client I'm ever working with around anxiety, I'll tell them, let me tell you a little bit about how I think about anxiety and how I work with it. And I'll give them these 3 root causes. I'll explain them briefly to them. And 100% of the time, and this has never not happened, 100% of the time, they can tell me exactly where their anxiety comes from. And they'll tell me, I do one of those, but not the other 2, or I do 2 of them, but not the third, or I do all 3. And these can show up in any combination, but people do tend to gravitate. Well, you can do all 3, but there may be 1 or 2 that is most familiar to them, that they recognize is a place they more consistently, operate from.
So just to recap on the 3 of those for people who are following along, catastrophizing is one of them, mm-hmm. Control is the second one, and distorted beliefs is the third one.
Yes.
And I do agree with what you said. I think people would recognize which one they fall into. Do you think the way someone gets assistance is different depending on which one of those they fall into?
I think that the strategies that you use are, and I don't want to overstate this because, I believe that the thing that's going to work best is the thing that works for you. So there are so many tools and strategies out there to address anxiety. And that's great that there are so many different options available. And it's true that the one that works best is the one that works for you. So I don't want people to get rigid and linear about, which strategies they use. But what I found is that when you understand what the root cause is of the anxiety or what the underlying need is, so catastrophizing, that underlying need is about a discomfort with uncertainty. And from that place of uncertainty, which the human mind does not like uncertainty, it equates it with danger. It tries to problem solve as a way of feeling like it's doing something useful to protect you. So our human mind will automatically jump to these future problems that are not happening and try to problem solve for them as if that is going to protect us. And what we know is that it doesn't. But so the issue really of catastrophizing is about this discomfort with uncertainty, and it is about spending a lot of mental energy in the future. And so the solutions that you're going to use for those are about mindfulness and about bringing yourself into the present moment and really attending to what you actually know to be true versus what the stories that you're making up about the future. Learning how to stay more present in the now moment, and growing your capacity to tolerate uncertainty. So those are the tasks that are most useful and most important when it comes to catastrophizing.
I do like you said. I'm sorry,
go ahead. No, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, I like that you said there's no one solution for everyone or one solution that works, because we touched on that at the onset, that even when take 2 minutes isn't for everybody. It's just another tool that works for a lot of people, and hopefully more people will find it and like it. But at the same time, I'm not trying to create something that is going to be all encompassing for everyone. It's just another solution, another opportunity to try. Hopefully it helps some people.
Yeah, and it's a great tool. I mean, just like what I've learned about it's a great tool that it has so many, strategies that people can easily access to help them, in a moment if they're feeling, panic or anxiety, or, just helping to address their mindset and the way they're thinking about things.
So this is a general statement, and again, nothing applies to everyone, but in talking and listening to you describe each one of these and some of your descriptions around the mind will try to solve problems, I think mentally my personality is a problem solver. It's just my nature, is what I enjoy doing. And I have noticed over the years that if I don't have enough going on, if I don't have problems to solve, that's when I start making up anxiety situations in my head and I start feeling a little bit of anxiety. And knock on wood, I've been very lucky. I've never had extreme anxiety, and I'm really happy about that. But at the same time, I can tell when I have a little bit of anxiety, and quite often it's when I'm not busy enough. And not saying that everyone has to be busy and that's the solution. There's probably mindfulness and ways to calm yourself down.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, I found that if I do have, I'm going to say, problems to solve, and those problems to solve quite often are things like trying to find ways to get more people to recognize Take 2 Minutes. It's things I enjoy doing and things that I want to do and ways I want to help others. And that's probably the key, is helping others for me.
Yeah.
But as I do that more, I probably have less mental capacity to focus on things that are made up, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. One of the things that I heard a long time ago is the mind can only focus on one thing at a time. And so it stands to reason, if it's focused on something that is anxiety producing, you're going to feel anxious. And if it's focused on something that's either neutral or calming or enjoyable, that's going to shift your mood accordingly as well. And, one of the things that it sounds like you're saying is that if you don't have enough to do, and that, can lend itself to, looking for problems to solve that don't exist. But it sounds like what you find is if you engage in something that's meaningful to you, or that feels purposeful or aligns with your values, or just brings, enjoyment, that helps. And that would for anybody. I mean, that's always a good, goal, is to make sure that what you're investing your mental energy in, and as well as your physical energy and emotional energy, are things that feel purposeful to you and are aligned with values.
So you mentioned that there's different ways for everyone to be more mindful and focus on the present. What are some of the activities you like to recommend to people to try?
For mindfulness, yeah. So, one thing when it comes to anxiety is really to practice like differentiating between the facts that I know and the story I'm making up, and bringing yourself back to, what do I actually know to be true? And what do I actually know to be true is what I know is true right now. So that is a very important practice to get into when you have anxiety. Other, practices for mindfulness is really just, it can be as simple as really being engaged in whatever it is that you're doing. So one story that I tell in the book is of a client who would go for daily walks, but she realized that on those walks, she would be, thinking about things she was worried about, or going over her to-do list, or thinking about all the things she has to do. And one day she just decided to just pay attention to what was happening around her. So she just really was intentional about looking around and, noticing what she was seeing and coming into contact with on her walk. And she described, I saw the sun in the sky and the clouds, and I could feel like the warm temperature. And, I saw people walking their dogs and children playing in the playground. And she made a point of making eye contact and saying hello to people as they passed. And just doing that completely transformed the experience of going for a walk for her. And she noticed how different her mood was, and how much calmer she felt, and just more connected to herself she felt. So it can also really just be about really paying attention to what is happening around you in any given moment, is in whatever you're doing, is another great mindfulness practice.
That's almost like a real-time grounding exercise or a combination of grounding and gratitude. And I can, again, recognize both those. I'd like to go for walks, and I do find quite often that I do get troubled with all my to-do lists, and I want to rush my walk because I want to get back and start getting things done, and I feel like I'm wasting time. But what you're saying, and for people to take away, is try to focus on what's around you more than what's in your mind, and that helps ground you. And that grounding exercise could be recognizing the beauty that's around you, recognizing people, other dogs, plants, flowers, whatever it may be, but take note of those things in your environment. That helps bring your attention to the present and what's around you, which will get your mind off of the worrying about things you need to do and enjoy what you're doing.
Exactly.
Yes. So that's one. What else do you like recommending? And that one, I got a combination of grounding and gratitude.
Yeah, and grounding exercises are also great. Particularly if you notice yourself feeling very activated, and feeling, really like the physical manifestations of anxiety or even panic. Grounding exercises, ones that I like to recommend is, just sitting down, putting your feet on the ground, and really that's literally grounding yourself and, making contact with the floor where you can feel that. And, you probably are familiar with the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique, which is, to take in 5 things that you see, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And what that is about is really bringing all your senses into the present moment and using your senses as a way to ground yourself. And when you do that, most people will find that there starts to be a calming effect to doing that.
And that particular one is built into Take 2 minutes. You can just text back, ground me. You're going to get the activity sent to you with a little form you can fill out for the 5 things you see, 4 things, 3, 2, 1. And the neat thing about it is it does log it for you, so you can go back in the future and look at places you have been or things you've put down in the future. So the grounding one you also mentioned, as far as just feeling the ground, I've also heard some people taking it to the next level and saying that, if you need to, take your shoes off and get on concrete. Yeah, absolutely.
And then people take it even a step further. And if you can barefoot in grass or the dirt, that there's, something about literally grounding yourself with the earth that, can be very calming. Anything that involves nature is also very regulating and calming for our nervous system. I think most people can relate to this from personal experience, that when you put yourself in nature, it really does just calm your nervous system. It makes you feel connected to something bigger than yourself. Just that sense of wonder that we often feel when we're in nature or see something really beautiful. So nature is a great way to do that as well. Gratitude, you mentioned gratitude, and that's, also is a really great tool to help with anxiety. And, I like to talk about gratitude not in the sense that you ever have to minimize or, dismiss the challenges that you're facing. You can let those be there and be present. And it's also just about holding another truth at the same time, which is that even in the midst of challenges, there are things or people that you can be grateful for, that even if it's as simple that, I have the comfort of a home, or I have, heat or cooling, or, fresh water to drink. It can be as basic as that, but also really recognizing, all the supports that you have, and, all the, anything that feels like it positively influences your life.
I like what you said. Again, with Take 2 minutes, I've had a lot of people reach out and say that they don't want to partake in, I can't remember how they phrase it, but it's like false positivity or fake positivity or something like that. And I'm always saying that's not the goal. The goal is not to pretend to be positive. The goal is just to recognize gratitude so that you can recognize where there is positivity, so you're not in a negative downward spiral, because there's going to be bad happening all the time to everyone. And the goal is to not focus on it. There's going to be ebbs and flows. There's going to be things that directly affect you. There's going to be times where you're going to be down, and that's okay. That's an emotion, right? If you're sad, that's an emotion. You should still embrace that emotion and not try to have fake or false positivity at a time of
Right.
when you're sad. But at the same time, a way to get out of that sadness and not fall into a spiral of getting more and more sad and depression, and all of a sudden 3 weeks have gone by, is to recognize gratitude around you while you're even grieving or struggling, because
Yeah.
it will help you crawl out of that negative pattern sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And what the research says about gratitude is it doesn't minimize or reduce negative emotions and experiences. It builds the positive, which serves as like a cushion or helps build your resilience. And so, that's really what the power of gratitude is. It's not to replace the negative. It's to be held side by side with the negative.
Since I've been doing Take 2 Minutes, when I say doing, it's a building process. I've been building it for about 6 years now. I learned in that duration of time that some people really struggle to recognize gratitude. If you ask them to write down something they're grateful for, some people just have a blank look, like I can't think of anything. Did you experience that with people you encounter?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm actually thinking about, and I shared with you, my son struggles with anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder. And I'm immediately thinking of a conversation he and I recently had where he was just in a really kind of negative spiral. And, I was, really listened and, tried to really just acknowledge what he was feeling and validate what he was feeling. And at some point suggested that it might be helpful, and if he could also try to think of, 3 things that he was grateful for. And he said, it's really hard to think of right now. And I think that if you are in a really negative space, or if things do feel really challenging, it can be hard to think of things. Gratitude is kind of a practice, just like everything else is. And this is why, there are so many things that are available to people that we know work because there's so much evidence. And again, nothing that works for everybody. So it's really important that people find the thing that works for them. And you are the best expert on what works for you. Nobody else is going to know that better for you or, better than you. But a lot of these things require practice and repetition, just like exercise does, just, anything, does. And the more that we practice it, the more easily it's accessible to us when we need it. And that's true of breathing exercises. That is true of practicing mindfulness. That's true of gratitude. They're all things that they're called practices because you do need to practice them in order to be able to use them when you need them.
So one more little pitch for Take 2 Minutes here, talking about gratitude.
Yeah.
It's something that I was pretty proud of. Once I recognized that some people do struggle with finding things or gratitude statements, I created what I call a gratitude challenge. And the idea behind the gratitude challenge is there's 120 prompts in the system that it will send you one randomly every day. And the prompts are all things that are pretty generic, meaning everyone should have some sort of gratefulness for what they are. And it then asks you to write a gratitude statement about it. So an example, the one I always use for an example, people have probably heard before, is the sun provides light and heat to our planet. Think of a reason why you like the sun. And it gives someone a reason to think about one object and what they like about that object. And what I found is for people who struggle with their gratitude practice, who want to gratitude journal but aren't good at finding things, if they do a 15 or 20 day gratitude challenge and every day get one of these prompts, at the end of that 15, 20 days, they're just recognizing things around them automatically.
Exactly
they're
right.
grateful for. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And, once you start looking for them, it can also be not only noticing things that you're grateful for, but noticing when something happens that feels good. It could be a song that you love comes on comes on your playlist. You weren't expecting it because it's on shuffle, or, you get a text from somebody that, feels really warm and supportive. It could be anything and really small, but when you start to notice when something happens that feels good, that builds your capacity to start noticing those things more and more.
Yes. And I like all of those things. So what else can we cover here, Noelle? You, besides anxiety, you mentioned, I think you do family counseling. What else do you think is important topics?
Well, could I talk a little bit about the underlying needs for control and distorted belief?
Please. I would love that. Yes.
Yeah, just because we spend a lot of time on catastrophizing, which is a big one that, a lot of people do. With the control, the underlying issue with control, as I said, it's that feeling of I'm not okay or it's not going to be okay. And then what we end up doing to try to feel as if we're going to be okay is we externalize the conditions under which we can be okay. So as long as everything out here looks the way that I think that it should or I want it to, then I'll be okay. As long as I anticipate everything that could go wrong and I make a plan for it, then I'll be okay. So we're really externalizing the conditions under which we can be okay. And the solution to that is to build to internalize a sense of trust within ourselves that we possess everything that we need, both our own internal resources as well as external resources that are available to us, that we already possess everything we need in order to be okay. And what that means is not that what happens out here has to look okay, because we have no control over what happens out there. It means that whatever happens out there, I have the capacity to figure out how to respond, how to take care of myself, so that I will be okay. And so it's really shifting, where we place the condition of our being okay from outside to inside. And that really is about understanding and really recognizing and owning all the capacities that we possess. So all the things that are part of who we are that will show up no matter what happens, and that will help us to be okay. And to really start to lean into trusting that, which means that we have to start letting go of some of the things that we're doing, the over preparing, the over researching, the anticipating what could go wrong and making plans. We need to take, risks with and practice letting go of some of those behaviors and really reinforcing and internalizing the trust that, I've got this. Like, whatever happens, I'm going to be okay.
Right. So that one I can relate to a few people I've talked to, or I will actually say I know. And I think the control one falls into this category. You can tell me, but there's some people I know who I believe focus so much on that control where they, what I call, make their world smaller. They try to do less. They try to not go places. They try to stay in their house. And in my mind, their world gets smaller and smaller to where their only comfort zone is their house and they don't want to leave their house. Whereas in reality, what you're saying is you should recognize that you're not going to control everything on the outside. You have everything you need to be well. And I also believe, and I'm looking for your input here. I also believe that challenging yourself sometimes and getting outside of what you think is your safe area is a good exercise because it will show you can do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So a big part of that can absolutely be stepping outside of your comfort zone, which is, what you're, describing, that and some people's comfort zone can become very small. And, that can be because of catastrophizing and what they think is going to happen out there. That could be because of distorted beliefs and sort of what they believe about themselves, or, again, social anxiety can be very isolating because when you believe that people are going to judge you or are going to think that you're stupid or that you're, going to be awkward if you interact with them, like you can make your, world very small because it become afraid to go to social events and interact with the world. So I would say globally, yes, that we all need to challenge ourselves to step outside of our comfort zones. And whenever we do, our comfort zones expand. And one of the things that happens when we do step outside is regardless of what the outcome is, it's wonderful if it goes great and we have this really positive experience. But sometimes stepping out and not having the experience that we hope to have and realizing I'm still okay, it can be very valuable in and of itself as well.
I found it interesting that in talking about that comfort zone and the world getting smaller, you actually gave examples on how that could be catastrophizing, distorted beliefs, or control causing that.
Yeah, that could be a behavior that, comes from any of those. the kinds of behaviors that I tend to see a lot with the control is sort of the over functioning and the, people who, first of all, I'll say this, people who have anxiety stemming from control are always, and I've never encountered an exception to this, they are always highly competent, very effective, very capable people who are almost afraid to stop. Like they're afraid to rest, they're afraid to relax, they're afraid to let go and let somebody else do something, or because there's this fear that if I don't keep over functioning, or if I'm not the one who does it, then it's not going to be okay. I mean, that's always the end result. Like something bad is going to happen and it's not going to be okay. Something's going to fall through the cracks and it won't be okay. So what I find is that there actually tends to be a lot of over functioning that comes with control, and that a lot of the work that you end up doing is about letting go, learning how to rest, learning how to say no to things that, you're doing because you are afraid if I don't do it, then who will? And relying on other people more. I mean, so, and risking that not risking, this will happen. They won't do it the way you would do it, but it will still be okay. So it's really about sort of building that muscle of, I actually can step back and do less and things are still going to be okay. I don't have to be the one doing everything.
That's a very good, again, I can relate to some of those things. I think we've talked about the underlying need now for control. Is distorted beliefs the one you want to touch on next?
Yeah, so the last one for distorted belief, that one, the underlying issue of that is the false belief. And those, I'm going to say this, I give these sort of 3 underlying root causes. That does not explain how each individual person comes to, these traits. And that is still work that everybody needs to explore on their own. Everybody has their own life experience and their own story and their own biology and all of that in terms of how they have come to, have anxiety coming from, these 3 root causes. Distorted beliefs, though, very often is is a belief that we come to early on in life, and that is an interpretation of things that maybe that we're observing or that are happening around us. I like the quote that children are keen observers and terrible interpreters. So, that children are observing and are really absorbing what is happening around them, but come to misinterpretations all the time to explain why things are happening. And, those misinterpretations can become the foundation for those distorted beliefs. So the work that is involved around distorted beliefs is really to, one, understand what that core false belief is that you hold about yourself, and to understand that by its very definition, it's false, which means something else is true. So it becomes about how you identify what actually is true. And it's about understanding what behaviors you engage in because of the false belief. And then thinking about, okay, if I believed this corrected belief to be true, what would I be doing then? And then practicing those behaviors. So it's more work around really correcting and coming to a more accurate view of yourself, and then practicing ways of being in the world and interacting with people that reflect, that corrected belief. And it's through doing that you actually then will start to believe it. You don't believe it at the outset. You just have to be willing, to try it out, and to be open to the possibility that you might come to see yourself differently.
Earlier, when you're talking about distorted beliefs, you gave an example. Do you mind giving one more example of distorted beliefs?
Sure. So, one that I can think of is, I'm a failure. So, if you have this belief that, I'm a failure, you're going to tend to view, sort of things that happen in your life through that lens. I tell the story of somebody that I worked with who very much had that belief. And when she was in graduate school, she told me that her focus of therapy in graduate school was around her constant fear that she was going to fail out at any moment. And I asked her, well, what kind of grades did you get in graduate school? And she said, I got all A's. And asked her, so how did you convince yourself you were going to, fail? And she said, well, everybody gets A's in graduate school. And of course, that's not true. But so she, managed to sort of distort this experience that she was having through the lens of being a failure. And, so anything that would happen, things go wrong, we make mistakes and we don't do things perfectly. And she would overtly focus on that as like evidence of failure. So when you have a belief about yourself, you start to view everything through that particular lens. I sort of describe it as like looking in a funhouse mirror and thinking that the reflection you see back is what you really look like. The more that we are attached to that particular belief, the more committed we're going to be to preserving it. And, we do that by rejecting compliments or feedback that we get from, the outside world that tells us the truth of who we are. And she did that by saying everybody gets A's in graduate school as a way to, deflect what was obviously true, which was that she was quite capable.
So you give workshops on these 3 root causes and try to teach or train others to recognize or understand these. Is that correct?
That's right.
Are they online, in person? How do your workshops work?
Well, I'm just licensed to provide continuing education to mental health professionals in the state of Illinois. And I mostly do my trainings in person because they are a 6-hour training, and I don't think anybody wants to do a Zoom training for 6 hours, myself included. And then I run a continuing education training center through my practice, and those feature other professionals who are speaking on different topics, and those are usually an hour and a half to 2 hours, and the people who are in Illinois again can sign up for those and get continuing education credits.
I enjoyed hearing about those 3 root causes because I've talked about anxiety a lot with Take 2 Minutes, and I think this was kind of shed a new light on the different, say, subcategories that you defined of anxiety. And I think that was very enlightening. I hope viewers get some knowledge out of that. Is there anything else you'd like to plug or talk about?
I just would say that if anybody is interested in learning more, that there's a couple ways they can find me. One is on Instagram, and that's at Noelle McWard Aquino. Currently at my practice website, which is counselingsolutionschicago.com, I do have an anxiety relief guide on that website that goes through these 3 root causes and, sort of the underlying need and the solution to each one. So if anybody wants to get that is available and free on the website. And that also will keep you updated about like other things that will later be available that go into more depth around all of this.
And for those who are watching on YouTube, I'm going to try to share your Instagram page just so people can see how to spell your last name. So that's how you can find Noelle on Instagram. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you. It's great talking to you. And again, I love what you're doing with Take 2 Minutes. So I'm really thrilled to know about it as a resource.
Thank you very much. And again, for everyone, Noelle McWard, and it's counselingsolutionschicago.com is her website. Find her on Instagram. I'm sure that when we edit the video, we will put links to it on the video as well. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Thanks for listening. I hope you found that discussion helpful and interesting. If there are any topics you would like to hear discussed, head over to take2minutes.org and use the Contact Us form to submit your suggestions. Also, if you appreciate our content, sign up for an account at take2minutes.org. Subscriptions help us to continue generating new content. Thanks again.